Добре дошли на всички. Да поканим, ако някой отпред пред зала.
Welcome everyone. If you're still outside the room, please come in. Everybody's in. Welcome to the Citizens Dialogue. Welcome to all citizens of Sofia, to colleagues, journalists. My name is Mario Gavrilov. I'm privileged to be moderating this debate. While you're listening to me, please type slido.com in your cell phones, hashtag EU Dialogues. You can follow the event, and also it will be live streamed on our Facebook page. So do have in mind that you will be competing with the people who will be watching online, but you have the advantage of having a face-to-face contact with me, and you can ask your questions directly. The participants today are the Deputy Vice President of the European Commission, Mr. Jyrki Katainen. He's responsible for many things. They're all very interesting. They're very important. Jobs, growth, investment, and competitiveness. This is his portfolio. The MEP, Ms. Eva Maidel, and Deputy Mayor of Sofia, Mr. Doncho Barbalov. Good afternoon to you. First of all, I'd like to ask you to say a few words before we start properly. Please ask very focused, very straightforward questions. The topic of event is clear. We are not going to ask journalistic questions or make political statements. The interlocutors are very interesting. And now I'd like to pass on to Mr. Katainen for some introductory words. And please be very brief at the beginning. Mr. Katainen.
Thank you very much for coming here to discuss on the future of Europe. This is my third time when I have this kind of event in Sofia with Bulgarians, and every time it has been very nice. Last time I remember the debate was very heated thanks to very hot weather, but also thanks to the topics which were also quite hot. So I learned a lot. So the purpose of this discussion is to reflect what do we expect from the future of Europe. What are your views if everything went as well as it could go? What would happen in Europe during the next 5 years? What are the priorities you find, you personally or from Bulgarian point of view, you find the most crucial, what the next Commission should do? And also, what are the biggest challenges we are facing? It's very nice to be here together with Eva, with whom we have been working for 5 years or a little more than 5 years now on education especially, but also on investment and single market related issues. Eva has been one of my closest allies in the European decision making, so thanks very much for everything what we have done together in order to make Europe better. Also, it's very pleasant to see Deputy Mayor of Sofia, because he can bring some topical issues to the discussion from Sofia, from municipality perspective. What are the expectations the local authorities may have vis-à-vis the future of Europe? But if you allow, I would like to start by listing 5 points which I would do if I was a dictator of Europe, or if I was Ursula von der Leyen. So I'd like to focus first on circular economy. What circular economy means? Basically, I want to illustrate by using a couple of examples. If you are in a coal mine, digging coal ore, and you take 1 kilo of coal ore, and then you put cell phones 1 kilo of cell phones to another basket, there's much more code in the cell phone basket than in the code ore. So why to throw away cell phones once they get broken? There's much more code in these devices than in code ore. And this is one example why von der Leyen's Commission want to concentrate on regulating electronic devices in order to circulate all the valuables inside these phones over and over again. Because it means that we don't need to import valuable stuff to Europe once we can reuse them several times. The second example is, luckily we don't have plastic bottles here, but we all are using plastics, and plastics is made of oil. We pay a big price on importing oil from various parts of the world. And it doesn't make any sense to throw away oil which is in the form of plastic after one use. So from environment point of view, but also from economic point of view, from technology development point of view, it makes a lot of sense to recycle plastics over and over again. And just give you one concrete example what the Commission is doing currently is to create a quality standard for packaging plastics. So all the plastics which are used for wrapping ham or cheese or whatever should be a kind which fulfills the European standard. Why we are doing this standard? The reason is that we want to make it easier to recycle the plastics over and over again, because currently there are several different qualities in plastics and you cannot get proper new plastics if you mix all together. So circular economy, number one. Europe is leading this development currently. China is the second best. Americans are coming far behind. This is a big business opportunity, but very good for the nature and environment and in terms of climate policy. Second point to which I would like to concentrate on is artificial intelligence, because it will change the way we work, we consume, we live, etc. And it must be ethically sustainable. Like you may have heard, China does not really care about the ethics of artificial intelligence. They use private data for the government's good. But this is not the way Europe functions. We need to make sure that our ethical base is strong. And that's why we have to make sure that Europe is utilizing artificial intelligence and machine learning, but it must be ethically robust. Third thing to which I want us all Europeans to concentrate more on is defense and security. We have already now seen that all the member states, even the biggest NATO allies or biggest EU NATO members, are too weak to address all the security issues alone. I want to be very open in this discussion. Russia has interfered to our national elections or referenda several times during the last 5 years. And we have to do something to this. We need to make sure that our member states can expect fairly support from the others, and if need be, in cyber attack or in misuse of data. Of course, we have to look at also how we could use our defense budgets better than we do at the moment, because the problem is that EU 28 member states are using 50% of the amount of money what Americans are using for defense and security, but the outcome is 20%. Why we cannot get 50% of security out of 50% of investment we do to the security? The reason is that we are doing the same things 28 times. And it doesn't make any sense. We could and should cooperate between the member states much more than we do. So traditional security issues are still there, but there are a whole range of other new modern ways to put our sovereignty in question. Fourth point is Africa. Africa is becoming warmer or more hot political issue from many perspectives. Many Europeans are concerned about migration issue. Many of us are concerned about or are interested in economic opportunities there are in Africa. And many of us are interested in human rights and dignity issues in Africa, but also here. So we should have much more efficient ways to cooperate with African partners in order to help them to get robust economic growth, which is sustainable from environmental point of view at the same time. And final point, this homework for all of us, and it's the rule of law. The biggest challenge, or this is my personal thinking, the biggest challenge, or I would say even a threat today, which we are facing, is the deterioration of rule of law in some of our member states. Unfortunately, we have some political leaders who seems to think that rule of law or liberal democracy, as we understand it, it's old-fashioned, obsolete concept, and they want to replace it by using more authoritarian regime. So the issues like human rights, independence of judiciary, freedom of press, individual rights, etc., they are the cornerstone of the foundation of the European integration. So this is an issue in which we cannot make compromises. And as I said, I find the current situation really worrisome, and I find this as the biggest threat for the EU. So that's why we have to make our homework and make sure that our value basis is robust for the continuation or the further work of the European Union. So those were my 5 points: circular economy, artificial intelligence, security/defense, Africa, and rule of law. Thank you.
Сега давам думата за...
Now I'd like to turn the floor to Ms. Eva Maido, member of the European Parliament. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm happy that once again I have the opportunity to participate in one of the citizens' dialogues organized by the European Commission, and we have an axis of partnership. Yes, indeed, with Mr. Katainen, we worked on several issues, several topics, and I think that Bulgarian businesses, as far as economy goes, and under the Juncker plan, they proved that they could take advantage of the good ideas that in a very short time we managed to make real. What the Vice President of the Commission outlined is actually what Europe needs. We are talking about what Europe we want 12 years after we became members of the European Union. And I can join any of those 5 topics, but at the same time, what Europe do we want is a mirror of the question from the 90s. What Europe, where are we? Where are we? We want Europe to provide an environment for development and much more. And I believe that the Bulgarian society wants us to be better than the others, our neighbors or other EU member states. And I'm saying this because I would like to talk more locally. Over the past 5 years, Mr. Katainen and some of you know that we made good steps towards those 5 issues that Mr. Katainen mentioned, but we have still a lot to do. And in the past few years, I came to realize that if the society in general does not support this type of development, it's much more difficult to have this, to uphold this vision. Especially, it's more difficult when you go back to your member state and you go to in the regions. Well, in the big cities, it's much easier, and that's why maybe here it's much easier, but not everywhere. And I can see we have already a question. And how do those topics resonate in the Bulgarian society? Before I explain my main argument, and I said I'll be talking locally, I'd like to quote a few facts. I didn't know actually that since 2019 the average purchasing power of the people in Sofia is higher than the average in the European Union. And I don't know how many of you know this, because this is official data of Eurostat. And we are actually above the average in the European Union for the past 10 years. And many of you know that the south of Bulgaria is developing very well, and it accounts for 2/3 of the GDP of Bulgaria. Sofia contributes by 40%. But we can see there are regions like Vidin, Silistra, and I'm aware that if we look there, Europe is very different if we're there. I'd like to move on to my main argument now. I think there are two very important topics for those regions to feel Europe more. On the one hand, I believe that we should be helping much more SMEs in those places, because the average purchasing power there is 30% of the average for the European Union. And I believe that the European funds should be focused in this direction. So if European funds could change the way we live here in Sofia or other cities in Bulgaria, we should make this true in other regions as well. And this is what I wish to see in the next years. I want Europe to reach all Europeans, all regions. It could be the most remote region, but everybody should be able to feel Europe. And I think that for the future of Europe and countries like Bulgaria, maybe the biggest challenge will be the imbalanced development, the disbalance. And this has some risks related to the way societies are trying to grow. Many of our relatives, friends, I'm sure you have such, they go to study abroad. They want to work abroad. And there's nothing wrong with this, but they shouldn't be doing this just out of economic reasons. It's important that Europe is able to wake up those remotest places, most distant places, doesn't matter where they are. So then those five main topics that give us a vision and enable Europe to be on a par with China and the USA in the global competition, then there can be our common goals. Otherwise, there will be just the goals of larger regions and more developed regions. So I think that in order to have successful regions and cities, we should be thinking in the next 5 years of how to use Europe not only in terms of infrastructure, but those regions should have real development, and they should be aware of the importance of the big picture and the big goals that Europe has. And Europe should be pursuing those goals with the leadership and vision, because only in this way can we succeed in this global competition. Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope my daughter, who is 5 years old, I hope she didn't listen to you, because when you said the average purchasing power of Sofia citizens is higher than the average for the EU, she will be wanting many more toys. So now we move to the most local aspect, and this is Donču Barbalo from the Deputy Mayor.
I would just like to clarify that we're talking about average numbers. Of course, the average salary in Bulgaria is little above 1,000. This does not apply to the rest of the country. So I would like to underline that Sofia is showing very good average results as compared to other European capitals and member states. Another thing I would like to mention is that when we are talking about the future of the European Union, we must not forget that we are part of this European Union and European future, and our Bulgarian future is part of the larger European perspective. So each of these priorities, these perspectives, concern us as much as any other member state, and we must learn to think of ourselves in this larger context, and we must not forget about the different regions and pay attention to this fact, as was already mentioned, because investment and jobs and prosperity is growing in Sofia, but other regions have not been as successful. As I said, in August, the average Bulgarian wage was above 1,000, which cannot be said about the other regions. We must do a lot to support and help the other regions, while at the same time keeping Sofia as the main focal point. Thank you very much. Now, the audience has the floor. Please answer the following question in Slido. Do you think that your voice is heard in Europe? The options are yes, no, and I cannot decide. I cannot judge. After this, we are going to ask our panelists to comment on the results. Maybe we can start talking about this. I don't know whether Vice President Katainen is interested in the answer to this question as a self-proclaimed dictator. We see more or less a balance. We're still running the voting. Are these results typical of other member states too? Do you think that it is normal for about half of the people to think that their voice is being heard and half of the people to disagree?
Results varies between the member states, of course, but always, even though turnout is 21, I don't mean that this is the same in the whole country, but it tells more about the audience. So what is common is that in those countries where people think that their voice is heard, there the government is relatively active telling people what are they expecting from the future of Europe, or that the governments are usually saying that we are pushing forward this and this initiative. So if the local authorities are active telling what do they expect on energy market, on security, on education, on immigration or migration issues, or on investment related to the EU decision making, then people usually find that it's relevant. The EU is relevant, or the European layer in decision making is relevant, and almost always the citizens find that, okay, once it's relevant, I also have an opinion, and I'm encouraging government to do right things. So that's why EU cannot be seen only as a organization based in Brussels, because you guys and your government and the parliament, you are the owners of the EU. We are officials. We are doing things what falls in our remit, but the owners are national decision makers and the citizens. So that's why it's so important to have discussions like we are having today, because the more we think that I have some expectations vis-a-vis the future of Europe, the more I potentially try to influence the local decision makers, and the more our voice is heard.
Бърз коментар от госпожа Майдел и от господин Барбов. Резултатите като че ли има...
We see more or less that we have a balance between the yes and the no. We have 12% of undecided. Now I'm going to ask the other two panelists to comment. I agree with what Vice President Katainen says. when, as a society, we know what our personal objectives are, the objectives of my company, my town, my NGO, when we know this, we can ask the people we elect, the local institutions, the national institutions, the European institutions, to follow in accordance with our priorities. I'm trying to remember what the answers were last time. I think last time more people felt that their voice was being heard. I don't remember exactly, but now we see a balance between the yes and the no, and I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing, because maybe we have come to a point where we have larger expectations from the European institutions. Very often, myself and my team say, our door is always open. We may not be always able to help, but we're always there. We try to always be there. I started by saying that we work on specific priorities, those which are related to SMEs, education and training, and they are still our priorities, the priorities of our team. But we have come to realize that we also have another objective, and this is related to the fact that Europe does not reach everyone. And whenever I focus on our priorities, I must always try to keep in mind the communities who believe that they have not been reached by Europe. Mr. Barbov has been involved in these issues quite a lot over the last year. Yes, I agree. And I think that Europe can hear us, but we need to make the necessary steps in order to be heard. We've had examples where we, as a municipality, have had issues that we want to discuss. We've asked for a meeting. Meetings have been organized, and our voice was indeed heard. I think the more people want to be heard, the more they will be heard. I think this is a trend we've been seeing over the last few years. It's been developing. We see progress in this respect, and I think this is to the advantage of everyone. Now, let's start our discussion. I'll give the floor to the audience. I would like to ask you, please be concise and be specific. We've had some very interesting questions online. Now you have the floor.
I have a question for you, sir, and it has to do with your third point about defense and security in Europe. I would like to ask you specifically, how do you see the development of EU defense and security policy, specifically given the way that Russia and China are developing their defense and security policies in the last several years? If you look at what's going on, just today I was reading about the Donbass region, through proxy powers and proxy units, Russia has managed to destabilize the region, and it is now successfully bidding for a referendum on its semi-independence. If you look at what's going on in the South China Sea and China's relations with the Philippines, you can see similar actions. And what I'm trying to outline here is that if we're looking at other international actors' defense and security policy around the world, people are moving away from the Westphalian understanding of warfare. We're now talking about large armies. We're now talking about large budgets. Increasingly, we're moving towards the cyberspace as well, and it is becoming a more and more potent space and way of exerting influence over international partners and counterparts. So my question again is, how do you see it? Because earlier you spoke about the way that we spend our money and what the ultimate results are, but is purchasing tanks or aircraft carriers and so forth the most effective way of defending ourselves, or shouldn't we think a little bit more outside the box? Thank you anyway.
Thank you very much. Very comprehensive question. Just for the beginning to mention a few topics which we have changed during the last 5 years, because the EU, as you know, and everybody knows, EU is not a military alliance primarily or at all, and defense basically belongs to the member states. So EU as such does not have competence that much in defense. And there are good historical reasons when talking about sovereign state. what is more core business of sovereign state, it's security and defense. But now things have changed because our member states have realized that they cannot take care of their citizens or their citizen security or the country's sovereignty if we don't cooperate more. So member states, with the support of Commission, decided to set up permanent structured cooperation. Its acronym is PESCO. PESCO basically can mean whatever member states are willing to do together. For instance, crisis management cooperation in third countries, or it can mean purchasing defense capabilities together in order to save money and make mutual assistance easier, and things like that. Then we have established, first time in the EU's history, the European Defence Fund, which provides financing to cross-border defense research, but also capability development. For instance, if there are 3 countries or 3 companies from three different EU countries which are developing a drone or satellite, the whole idea behind this fund is to encourage companies from different member states to cooperate instead of continuing like they have done so far, trying to develop capabilities alone. But then there are a whole range of new security issues like hybrid threats. Sometimes hybrid can mean a combination of intrusive cyber attacks against member states combined with you can easily create a chaos in a member state. So, or then, unfortunately, it's possible to spread some diseases like lethal influence, knowing. For instance, it can be very, very bad for the sovereignty of the member state. So having said all this, I try to illustrate most of the member states is very high, as it must be. But what happens before we are in Article 5 situation? Member states and the EU competence. So that is the reasons why member states have now decided to start below the Article 5 threshold, hybrid cyber defense, but also in trade and investment. Because today, investment to our member states can to end up to the situation where all our energy networks are in the hands of a company coming from third country, which is not necessarily respecting our values. And we don't want to get hooked by third country operators. So I'm not sure if I answered to your question properly, but I just wanted to illustrate the whole change of mind. And now I'm very satisfied that the next Commission President is also very interested in security/defense cooperation, taking into account her background. And this is something what our citizens are also expecting. Actually, it's quite amazing that 5 years ago, if you ask whether EU should do something to the security, people say, no, we are not military alliance, don't touch the security or defense-related issues. But now people, it's on top of the priorities. People are expecting EU to be more involved in the security and defense issues, and for good reasons. For instance, what we have seen happening in our national elections or referenda, it's one example. Yeah, we just have to cooperate better and more deeply in order to counter third countries, or actually sometimes non-state actors participation to our democratic process.
Благодаря ви. Преди да дам думата на следващия.
Thank you. Now, before I give the floor to the next member of the audience, I would like to ask you to please say a few words about yourself, present yourself before you ask your question. You have the floor. Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Velko Ivanov, European Movement Bulgaria. I have only one question to our distinguished guest, Mr. Katainen, because Ms. Maidel is my boss, so to speak, and Mr. Barov will all be able to see what we have done here in Sofia, even as they go out of this conference hall, they can see all the efforts that we have put into making Sofia a better place. So, as I said, I'm asking a question only to Mr. Katainen. First of all, I would like to say a few words for your work in Finnish. I'm in a bit of a conflict of interest because I'm a member of the Bulgarian-Finnish Friendship Initiative. I'm sorry that in 2014 and 2019 there were Finnish candidates for the top position, but it so happened, well, actually one of them is here with us today, but it so happened that other people were elected. First of all, President Juncker was elected. There was a visit where you went to Helsinki. You seemed to step down. Now we have the new president who promises more powers for the Spitzenkandidat. And my question is, would it not be better for for Europe itself to introduce something like the American primaries for the European parties to elect among their members respective candidate for president of the European Commission, instead of having all these dubious discussions and bargaining, so to speak, because previously we were told that there would be no compromise in European values and that the NEP values would be upheld. So, finally, Ms. Maidel, I would like to wish you all the best in your future professional activities. Your work is an example of how things should be done. I hope that you, in the next European Commission, will find someone like Mr. Katainen to work with and to cooperate with. Now, Mr. Katainen, before you answer, could you tell us what we heard in Finnish? I suppose nobody was able to understand.
It's excellent, or something like this. Yeah. So thank you very much for your kind words. I do agree with you on the process, because once we expect that people, citizens, and local authorities, I mean also the national governments, are taking more ownership vis-à-vis the European project, it's obvious that people should have a better kind of view on the leading candidates too. So that's why I think it's very important that the candidates, candidates, but also later on elected commissioners go around and participate to the events like this, just like what MEP is doing. So I have done this kind of events. I think this is 86th or something like this. And I must say that it was very natural to me to participate to the citizens' dialogues or to be in direct contact with Europeans, because this is exactly what I did when I was prime minister or party leader or finance minister in Finland. So, I mean, I had events every week in some shopping mall or in marketplaces. Because it was the only way to understand what is going on and also learn from our citizens what I have done wrong, what I have communicated wrongly, what I have done right, and get feedback. So I expanded a little bit to your focus to wider connection between European decision makers and the citizens, because it's so important. It's also the way to improve the sense of being part of the European project, because it cannot function like in old times that the decision makers inform citizens after decisions have been taken. So what I said in the beginning, that in those countries where politicians are actively telling what is their EU agenda, there usually people find that their voice is heard.
Доколкото и другите двама наши участници бяха замесени във въпроса, кратък коментар от тях да чуем.
Can I have the comments of the other two panelists, please?
This is one of the most frequently heard comments from the civil sector. Yes, indeed, we sometimes are successful in our attempts, sometimes not. That's why I believe that in the next 5 years, not only the civil society, but I can also speak on behalf of some of my colleagues at the European Parliament. You saw that the election of the President of the European Commission every 5 years happens with fewer votes. And probably this, because of this impossibility to elect a Spitzenkandidat in the way most of us want to. But there are other representatives of the civil societies. They say, well, we don't understand the process, it's not clear. And I'll go back to my main point, that Europe should reach everyone so we can explain why this democratic process is so important. We are going to vote for all the members of the European Commission now. The hearings are underway now. So this is a test that all the institutions should go through, so that we can see whether we are able to gain enough support. If there's not enough support from the European Parliament, I believe that this largely means that the members of the European Parliament are not so much convinced in the process, that the process went on as planned. So when in the next 5 years, we should actually there's a phrase in English, and in my statement in the plenary hall, I said it's time we walk the talk. That means we walk the words that we are saying, because the reform and the way that we have been trying to reform the election system so that reflects the voices of all European citizens, obviously this was not enough. And this was not taken into account by the European leaders when they made their decision in the summer. Mr. Barbalov? What I can say that when we look at the European Union, it's not a so old institution. It's a relatively new entity. We want things to happen fast, but if you look through history, a lot has happened since the establishment of the European Union, and we can see how much things change every day, and probably what you're proposing can happen over time, but it's a democratic the institutions develop in a democratic way. So we are witnessing a very fast and dynamic period, and I hope it will be better for all who live in Europe. Before I give you the chance to ask another question, we have a question from our online users. Can we find a balance between green energy and economic development in a country like Bulgaria? Because Bulgarians are very sensitive to the fact that green energy takes a lot of investment. Mr. Katainen, what can you say?
It means a lot of investment, but the main thing is that we have to encourage private sector to do the investment. It doesn't mean that that public sector or taxpayers' contribution is the most important contribution when changing the energy mix. So that's why everything what we can do for reforming energy markets so that it's profitable for private investors to invest in energy sector, including energy efficiency, then we can achieve the climate target. And this is happening already in many of our member states, so it's not a rocket science. Energy mix is the most important thing because energy production creates lots of CO2 emissions. But then the area where public sector plays a role is energy efficiency, especially in public buildings, but also in rental apartments, which are either publicly owned or then public sector can provide some financial subsidies for households to renovate the apartments. There again, we have member states where the regulatory policy has forced apartment owners, especially construction businesses which are building new apartments, to improve energy efficiency. Here again, we don't need necessarily public money that much, but the regulatory change make it profitable to invest in more energy efficient buildings. In case of Bulgaria, you have a special opportunity here coming from the EU, and that is structural funds. So there is plenty of resources available, even if the next budget would be slightly smaller in that sense. But nevertheless, there is plenty of resources available for reforming energy sector and using for energy efficiency. Final point. It's the circular economy, which we already discussed briefly in the beginning. Circular economy business models are the fastest growing business models in Europe currently. And I believe that there are two main economic drivers in the world economy in coming years. The first one is circular economy and the second one is artificial intelligence. So those two will change the way companies are making business, people are working, and we are consuming, and there again, technology is already there. So I'm one of the rare people who, at the same time, is deeply concerned about climate change, but is not concerned at all when it comes to how to solve the problem. I believe that it's solvable, and I want to put a lot of emphasis to the private sector and to the regulatory environment.
Госпожо Майдел.
Да, едно бързо включване.
A quick comment from me. I think that both can go hand in hand because with both we can see the need of implementing more technologies, and I agree with Mr. Katainen that this should come from the private sector mostly. We can encourage and create the right environment, but we expect the private sector to be the one to create innovations that will be leading, and not only in Europe but all over the world. There's no way to work only on one, to run only in one track. We have to do it in the other track as well. if we want to have economic growth and work in the area of economy and contribute to the welfare of citizens, we we can do this, but we should do it in a sustainable way. And the sustainable way of economic development is very important. And I can see a growing number of companies that are doing this. Almost all enterprises that I visited in Bulgaria, including today, I was in Novi Iskar, which is close to Sofia, and it was a company producing mix for tires. They contribute to the to clean air, to clean rivers. They do it in an environmentally friendly way. Our structural funds and the support we are receiving from Europe regarding this, I tell all entrepreneurs that in the next 5 or 6 years, the funds that can support their business are in this direction. And that's why I strongly recommend to all businesses to use this support. And many companies have been successful already. There's no way that we don't think about both things at the same time.
Give you an example on circular economy, energy efficiency, and new business models. So I don't say the name of the company because if I say something wrong, I'm not responsible. But you know the brand. It's a European brand producing these lights. You probably have this company's lights in your home. So the fastest growing business area is renting light. Instead of selling those light bulbs, they make an agreement or contract with, let's say, European Commission, and European Commission says that we need X amount of light per month. So the company provides you all the equipments you need. They pay the electricity bill, which means that there's an encouragement or incentive for the company to produce as electricity or energy efficient light bulbs as possible, and then they take care of the maintenance because they want to get the broken bulbs because they are dealing the aluminum parts to another factory and glass to another factory because part of their business profit is coming from secondary market of so-called waste. So the business model is growing for the obvious reasons because it's cheaper for the consumer and it's more energy efficient. So these kind of examples make me think that the climate issue is solvable if we just manage to create favorable business environment for this kind of growing businesses.
Господин Барбалов, ви чувам и вас като човек.
Mr. Barbalov, you are a person who works in the field, so to say, but while politicians in Brussels, they set the framework. This issue is something that we discuss every day. There's a lot of things that we can do to improve the environmental situation and implement green policies. But of course, we have to take into consideration what we can afford. But we should look in the long term and say, okay, we are here now. Where do we want to be in the long term? So we can have a long-term policy and with measures based on the resources we have and with the support of the people, of course, because green policies, ecology is something that people accept more and more. They want concrete results, and this is one of the priorities of Sofia municipality. And this very well connects with energy efficiency. As any municipality, we have a lot of buildings, so there are many opportunities to cut the costs. And there are different opportunities for funding. And of course, European funds are a very good opportunity. We have a number of projects. In the area of transport, we have very good examples, and very soon we will have 100% renovated transport, city transport. We use different sources of funding. Where we can, we use EU funding or our own funding because it's important to see to achieve the end result. And our long-term goals, and we want to be very flexible, of course. And the other thing that Ms. Maydell mentioned is promoting, is very important for promoting economic growth. So we work for green policies, but also for the development of the city. We are developing, our city is developing, economy is growing, and that's why we have a special unit at our administration that provides advice, economic advice, to incentivize the development of the city based on clean production, of course, and high technologies. Thank you. Next question. The lady first.
Please, would you
Yes,
introduce yourself,
I'm
please?
Iliana Savcheva. So, Mr. Katainen, part of your portfolio is about investments. And speaking of investments into business, the plan Juncker, it is the plan for investments. So my question is, will the focus be on investments into rural and non-urban areas? Since many countries are experiencing the issue of investments going to the big cities, and with these investments, also the people who used to live in those small rural areas, they're also going to the big cities. So what are the plans to change that, to bring people back to the rural and non-urban areas? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for raising the investment plan for Europe on the agenda. Its other name is Juncker Fund or Juncker Plan. First of all, I must say that I want to thank Bulgarians for being so active users of this fund. Bulgaria is the fourth biggest beneficiary of Juncker Fund. So Juncker Fund has mobilized already 2.4 billion euros in additional investment in Bulgaria. And that makes me really happy because it shows that the fund can be used in various types of member states. Also, there are 21 approved projects concerning small and medium-sized enterprise financing, meaning that some 10,000 Bulgarian SMEs have already got financing thanks to this fund. And here I want to thank the financial intermediaries like local banks, which have provided opportunities for SMEs to increase SME financing. So I want to thank private sector of this country, local authorities for conveying the message, and Eva for organizing several events to which I have participated and the other Commission officials have participated. So we still need to keep telling people that money is not running out, actually it's increasing, and make sure that companies and also public authorities knows that they can use EFSI. For instance, the city of Sofia or rural towns or municipalities can use Juncker Fund without permission from the central government. Because Juncker Fund is part of the European Investment Bank, and let's say, like was the case in Ireland, some local authorities wanted to invest in primary healthcare centers together with private sector. They had a PPP project there, so they directly applied resources from EIB without permission coming from any public authorities. So this is one of the messages I want to convey, knowing that there are local elections coming, that hopefully newly elected mayors use these opportunities more than they have used. There are some local authorities which have already used. So whether the money can go to the rural areas, it goes through SME financing, but also through municipality public investment. And I give you a couple of examples, which are, for instance, Agria Group is agrarian business. They have used Bulgarian company. They have used EFSI funding. Also, this is not rural, but this is in Sofia. Klošar bags, another different type of company, have got EFSI financing, and they want to expand their business cross border. They are producing very fancy bags, which they are willing to sell all over the world. Also, Software Group has used this. One additional point I want to make on this rural area and Juncker Fund. Actually, this applies to whole of Bulgaria because you have plenty of structural funds available. So you can combine structural funds and Juncker Fund together, and this makes it possible to use EU financial tools also in the areas where business case is the most robust one, because structural funds and Juncker Fund, they share the risk of private investor. So this is what we have tried to push forward, and there are good examples already now.
Заповядайте. Следващ въпрос.
Next question. Thank you. My name is Josif Avramov. I'm an associate professor in finance and banking, and I'm in the business as well. I have a question to Mr. Katainen. We Bulgarians expected from the Juncker Commission and the previous commission, Mr. Barroso's commission, three things. The first was the accession to ERM2. There's some progress on this. There was due diligence for the banks, but there's another 12 requirements for Bulgaria, so this hasn't happened yet. Next, accession to Schengen, and third, lifting the CVM. What is your estimates? Is this going to happen with the next commission in the next 2-3 years? And one more topical question. The US President Trump imposed tariffs on French wines, Scotch, whiskey, and other products, luxury products. The Commission did its best, and Mr. Juncker was in Washington 1.5 years ago and postponed this question because of coming elections. And there were the tariffs, after all. So what is the Commission going to propose a counter tariff from the other member states, not only those that suffered? Thank you. Very interesting questions.
Professor of Finance, you probably know the current state of play on ERM. So from Commission perspective, Bulgaria has done a good job, and there is significant progress which we have seen happening. There are still a couple of points or some issues which needs further work. For instance, the insurance sector legislation and anti-money laundering issues, and we know that there are work streams going on. For instance, insolvency and the role of state-owned enterprises have gone well. So I expect that after fulfilling all the criteria which everybody knows, and after being in ERM2 for 2 years, it's foreseeable that the country will join to the Eurogroup. So From my perspective, it looks quite promising, but there is no shortcut. Everybody must fulfill the same criteria. I must say that the euro area has also learned from the lessons in which we paid a high price. And one could say that now the rules are different for the newcomers than they were for the initial joiners. To some extent it's true, because we have revised our regulatory basis for the good reasons. So now the preconditions are harder than for those who joined from the very beginning, and the euro area was not ready, I must say. It's not going to be ready anytime soon. We have to further develop it, but some of the elements which Bulgaria, for instance, needs to meet are different today than they were before. But it's all only for to good of Eurogroup and for the good of Bulgaria in this case. So I'm pretty optimistic on ERM to issue regarding Bulgaria. On CVM, the Commission will do another assessment by the end of this this mandate, and here again we have witnessed significant improvement in terms of state of rule of law framework, and we are still assessing the latest changes in this respect, and will come out with the final assessment of this Commission. So we have to convince, or Bulgaria have to convince the other member states on this issue too. It's not only about Commission who decides whether the CVN process is over in Bulgaria, but also the other member states has to agree. So I do hope that things go smoothly, and we can wholeheartedly tell that now we support the end of CVN when it comes to Bulgaria. US tariffs. US just introduced new tariffs on various articles like cheese, wines, etc. And they have actually legal right to do so, because our Airbus company was found to enjoy illegal state aid. So some of our member states had subsidized Airbus in a way which is not compatible with World Trade Organization rules. And we have to accept this, and we have accepted this. So Americans have, this time they have legal basis for raising tariffs. They are not forced to raise tariffs, but they love tariffs, so that's why they raise tariffs. We know, and they know, that Boeing, American company, has also got illegal subsidies. And this case will come to the close in half-year time, sometimes in the beginning of next year. And it's quite obvious that we get permission to introduce new tariffs. So we have already selected a number of items which tariffs will raise, but it doesn't make any sense, because we on the contrary to Americans, we don't like tariffs. We have tried to negotiate with Americans that how about we find a solution together. You don't raise our tariffs, we are not going to raise your tariffs, and let's try to solve the problem. But they have not accepted this. I don't know for what reason, but this is the case. Now, another threat is that if President Trump devised to raise tariffs because they consider that our car industry is a danger to national security in the United States. This is a ridiculous claim, but this is what they have said, that once Americans want to buy European cars, it's an issue or problem to national security in the United States. And he has threatened that he would raise tariffs on our cars. Again, we have said that, okay, if this is a problem, let's get rid of all car tariffs. We don't collect any tariffs on your cars whether they are pickup trucks or lorries or passenger cars, and you don't do vice versa. So let's get rid of all the tariffs. But Trump said, no, we cannot get rid of current tariffs because it would mean that you would sell more European cars to our market, and we know that Europeans wouldn't buy American cars. So the trade balance would get worse. And our message has been try to decide what do you want. But it has been quite difficult for them. Sorry for being this open, but it's a little bit frustrating. We want really to make some sort of limited trade agreement with the Americans as soon as possible, because it would be good for both sides, and get rid of some tariffs on industrial goods, and also especially kill red tape. For instance, I give you an example. There are lots of pharmaceutical small companies, or actually medical device small companies all over Europe who would like to sell medical devices to America, and also American companies who would like to sell medical devices to Europe. But unfortunately it's very cumbersome. There are lots of regulation which makes this trade very difficult. So we would like to harmonize the regulatory basis in order to make it easier for both sides. But unfortunately, as much as we all like Americans, it has been very, very difficult to deal with them during the last couple of years.
Благодаря ви. Отзад имаше една вдигната ръка преди малко. Заповядайте, господине.
Somebody raised their hand towards the back. You have the floor. Pavlina Varamov, Doctor of Finance. My question is related to European funds. In the older times, we had some difficulties in relation to reporting. In particular, when we have monitoring of tender proceedings, there was always some sort of a problem, and legislation was always being changed in order to solve such problems. Do you think it would be possible in the future to adopt a regulation which would stipulate uniform rules for tender procedures in all countries, which would make it easier to check whether the rules are being fulfilled, and to check and monitor project implementation? I would also like to ask, in what way could we enhance the way that different citizens and different sectors can be heard, because Bulgarian transport sector did not have its voice heard. I'm sure that if the problem occurred in a bigger country like Poland, they would have been heard better. Thank you. Let's hear your answers. Is it true that when we have a bigger country, it is better able to support its causes? Is it better to? Is it easier for big countries to have their voice heard? First, as regards your first question concerning procedures and the change of rules, I will speak from my personal experience, because I have a direct impression of our projects. We all face the great dynamics, and this leads sometimes to rules changing as we are implementing a project. This happened during this programming period, and I don't think it can be avoided entirely. What we do, and what I think makes sense, is to try to adapt as quickly as possible to changing rules. Of course, some of these rules change because of our experience, because of lessons learned through mistakes we see. So we cannot oppose change. We should try to work together in the form of dialogue to make sure that projects are implemented and that we are not delayed. When we do things right, we have to make sure that things are done properly. Sometimes we have some discussions when it comes to reporting, but of course this is natural when work is being done. People have different opinions, and we have to try to clear things out. I don't think it's realistic to expect that rules will never change. On the other question, I will not agree with you because I think that over the last few months or a year, the transport sector, not only in Bulgaria, but in several member states, not just one or two, was heard. And the good thing here was that it was not just one member state, not two member states, but quite a few. And this is why the legislation which you refer to, the mobility package, was not adopted and it has not yet been approved. I would be happy if other sectors' voices were heard as well and if there was dialogue. But this dialogue should not go one way. Some of the participants in this dialogue wanted to have the whole package adopted as it was without change. The other side wanted for it to be scrapped completely. But on a European level, this cannot lead to success and to consensus, to a common agreement. Everybody should be willing to compromise. What do I mean by saying that the voice of the sector was heard? I mean that the proposal to which they really objected has not been adopted yet. But I would like to underline that the constructive way to lead a dialogue and to protect our respective sectors is to hear out the other side and be willing to compromise so that we will achieve a solution which is equally good for all the member states. We have to keep in mind that this is a sector which has been growing over the last 10, 12 years, exactly because of the European Union. Mr. Katainen, do you have anything to add?
Добре, много ви моля, два бързи въпроса имаме едновременно.
Two very quick questions, please. And then we can wrap up our discussion. Please be brief. Good afternoon. My name is Gancho Sokov, Sofia Press. I have my questions are not so highly specialized, they're more political in nature. What is Finland's position as regards Netherlands' position concerning the serious corruption in Bulgaria, the problem with the rule of law, and the crippling poverty of a large part of the population? What is Finland's position? I did say in the beginning that we cannot answer such questions because they are not in the scope of the subject which we are currently discussing. Okay, I would then like to ask another question concerning the new priorities. And do they include the Visegrad 4? We see how it is rather strong, and we saw Trump's reaction and how he said, "I am the twin of the Prime Minister of Hungary." These priorities, which are rather conservative in nature and seem to be leading towards a restructuring of Europe, please hand the microphone to the other member of the audience. Now, I would like to ask you again to enter into slido.com because in a minute you will be able to answer another one of our questions. My name is Mitko Tatarov, and my question is addressed mainly to Ms. Eva Maido and Vice President Katainen. Well, you talked about the priorities for the future of Europe, and I noticed you didn't say anything about European youth. So I would like to ask you a question. A lot of young people, especially in Eastern and Central Europe, do not feel represented in the decision-making process in the European Union. Do you agree that European youth is significantly heard in Europe when decisions are taken? And if not, what can or should be done so that young people can be more actively involved in the decision-making process? Ms. Maido, Mr. Katainen? I would like to say something about the youth of Europe. I'm very happy that I see many young people, students, university students. I've had personal contacts with some of the members of the audience. One of the probably best known program of the European Union is the youth program, which allows us to train and further our education. This is the Erasmus program. I think that the last 5 years, our activities were among our main priorities. We want to have more programs such as Erasmus. They would give an opportunity to Europeans. It doesn't matter whether they're Bulgarians, whether they're Finnish, Italian, an opportunity to go and travel, to meet another culture, to make friends. Only when we get to know with different nationalities and make friends, only then can we appreciate what it means to be part of a larger community. Very few European young people have friends in other member states. And then it is quite difficult for a member state to address a problem and to get the other countries to feel solidarity and to want to help. How can we ask Hans to set aside some of his funds to help us do better? Because we, in fact, are beneficiaries, because European funds do not just appear. We don't magic them into being. Somebody has to earn that European budget so that we can then use this budget. So I believe that young people want to do exactly what donor countries are doing. But in order to want to do this, they have to get to know the young people, not only in our region, but across Europe. And I hope that in the next 5 years, we'll see more such programs and we'll see them develop and become stronger. European Parliament has clearly stated that it wants a bigger budget for the Erasmus program. Currently, Bulgarian students who take part in this program are around 13,000, but if the budget increases, this number can triple. And this would be an excellent start. And another thing which I believe brings us together, this is education, and this is shared by myself and Mr. Katainen. Irrespective of whether a young person or a teacher takes advantage of this program or not, I think we should raise awareness, because there are some regions in Bulgaria where people don't know about them. So I think that whenever somebody participates in such a program, they should raise awareness. Now, all young people have telephones. This device can be used in order to get in touch with the real decision makers, with the European institutions. There are different forums where you can participate, forums such as this one, others organized in the European Parliament, forums organized by myself and my colleagues across the country. I realize there's, of course, a lot of information and a lot of noise which surrounds us. This information sometimes makes it difficult for us to judge where we should focus our attention. But please trust me, your activity, your involvement is what we really need. Believe me, there are people who want to hear you, want to work with you, and we want to continue doing this. So please be active. Look for knowledge, and you yourself will have the feeling that your voice is being heard. And it's not just important to hear you, of course, it's important for us to make real steps.
Well, this question was not addressed to me, but it's a very important topic, the future of young people in this country. It's in the global world, when we are getting closer to each other thanks to technologies, geography doesn't matter so much. And what we should do is to give an incentive to young people to remain here, because if we want economic growth, if we want to develop the cities, the country, we need educated young people, motivated people who want to change and develop our city, because we are becoming more modern, more beautiful, but we want to retain young people here. So because we want them to say that here it's a good place to live, to work, to have a family, and we can live together here and develop our city, because one of our problems is aging, the aging population, and caring about the young people and their professional and social development is very important for the future.
You may be right that young people are not sufficiently heard, but I would also say that it's not completely right. Like what Eva explained, there are a number of MEPs who have a close connection with youth organizations or individual youngsters. Eva is a good example of this. Also, I receive a lot of youth organizations, and we discuss on various topics, mostly related to mobility and education and university or education, other education related things. I just learned that since joining the EU, there has been 57,000 Bulgarians participating to Erasmus program. I also participated to Erasmus program because my parents could not afford to send me abroad to study, so I was very lucky to be in EU member state when I was still studying. So I went to the United Kingdom for 1 year to study, and it changed. I must say that it changed my entire life. I wouldn't be here without the experience. Also, everything related to free movement of people, it mostly all the initiatives goes to young generation side. For instance, transferable social security. It's one of the preconditions to make sure that people really can change. But final point, I would like to come back to the issue which I mentioned as fifth priority, which I find the most crucial, and it's the rule of law. The gentleman here asked about the rule of law and Visegrad 4. I must say that values are not only the things which you have to raise when you are giving a big speech in some anniversary. The values are very concrete things. Either we have free judiciary or then we don't have. Either press can express themselves freely or then they cannot. Either we have human rights and civil liberties or then we don't have, and all these have consequences. First of all, this is a democracy thing, but it has also significant economic impacts. Can a company invest without a fear to another member state if judiciary is politicized? No, it cannot. So that's why I really mean what I say, that in my mind the biggest threat currently is the deterioration of rule of law in some of our member states, and that's why we have to do our homework properly and counter this tendency, because it's the very fundamental basis of our unity. Thank you very much.
Благодаря ви, аз, господин Катайнен. Сега.
Thank you very much. Now your turn. Just imagine your politicians in Brussels, and now use Slido and type in the main priority that you should. Which do you think should be the main priority in the next 5 years for the next European Commission? Just one. No, you don't have a multiple choice. I'm sorry. You don't have multiple choice. You have to invent it. You have to write a word which should be the most important word for the European Commission in the next 5 years. And now the top choice will be in big capitals, in big letters. So climate. Well, to me, this is a bit surprising, but can we comment the results of this poll? And can you make some concluding remarks? Let's start in the opposite order. Mr. Barbalo, is climate the most important issue? It's a very interesting result. Well, climate means many things. It means environment. So maybe everyone, each and everyone has their own interpretation of climate, but the environment is very important. The climate is very important. We know global warming. We can see the effect of it, and it's good that people have chosen. This is the top choice of people, but we have to work in the long term. It takes a lot of efforts in the long term. So it's very positive that this is the big topic today. Ms. Maydell, some concluding remarks. And innovation now, we can see innovation is also a top choice. I'm very happy that the topics that we have been discussing are indeed the topic that are really here the participants here believe that they are important and should be important in the next 5 years. That means that our discussion has been meaningful. Well, you can see the dynamics of the results. They are changing all the time, but the key words remain. And I wish that in 5 years we have concrete results. And if these topics are leading topics now, well, another 5 topics. I hope that we will have started working in 5 years on another 5 topics. But I think we should look ahead. We should set the bar high. And I'm not surprised by the results, first of all, because we discussed them, and second, because this proves that citizens do see the need of focusing on those topics, not in every region, probably, but if we focus our efforts, this means that we will reach those regions that we haven't reached yet in order to make Europe more sustainable, more prosperous. And only this, in this way we can hear the messages. Mr. Katainen, innovation, you see, they're close to climate. Maybe many people have recognized circular economy as an important issue.
I think the climate is a matter of urgency. It's a fundamental issue for our planet, and innovation is a solution. Without innovations, we cannot address the climate issue. So that's why I'm very satisfied for this concentration. Then another set of things which belongs together is rule of law, youth and citizens. So they all are the sides of the same coin. So I'm very satisfied for this this prioritization. I think the both things, or innovation, climate, then citizenship/rule of law will be very high on the Ursula von der Leyen's agenda. Thank you.
Благодаря ви за участието тази вечер. Благодаря и на всички от нашата публика.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'd like to thank the participants as well. I've been in this business for more than 20 years, and it's always difficult to answer all the questions, but I think we can continue with the next event, with another event. I think we had an enjoyable evening.